In the previous 3 videos, we've talked about how even a simple object like a cube is made up of smaller components, if you like, the DNA of the object. And we've talked about how these little nodes in the corners that we call vertices that we can use to stretch out an object. We've talked about how these edges which connect the vertices together. And then we've talked about how once we've got all these edges and vertices in place, we've got a face that we can put in there which gives the object a solid shape. So the question is, what if you want to do something more complex than a cube? So if we want to break this up, and as you start doing more complex modelling, you will want to break up the cube into smaller pieces to give you more vertices and more edges to work with and more faces to work with. What we need to do is subdivide the object up. And this is actually quite easy to do. So, because we're not moving it around, if we're moving the object around in the scene, we will be in object mode, but we're not. We're going to edit the object, not edit its shape. So we're going to edit mode. We want it selected, which it should be by default. And then on the tools panel, you should have subdivide. If you don't see subdivide, you're not in the edit mode. So we come down here, or you need to scroll down. Subdivide, and you'll see what happens is it divides the box up into smaller parts, and each one of these is also an edge, and each one of these here and here is a vertice or vertex. So we've got loads of extra vertexes that have appeared here, which gives us more options for how we're going to change the shape of the box. So for instance, if I go to select, deselect all, or press A on the keyboard, and if I click on this middle one here and pull this out, you can see that I've distorted the box out. I've pulled out a shape from the box. So I've put this edge onto it. Okay, and if I chose this one here in the middle, I could do something with that. So that's boxes. So if you can imagine, if I instead came down here and said, let's select a edge rather than a vertex, I could press Shift. Let me try that again. Do the first one, Shift, second one, translate. And I can very easily make a sort of house shape. And I can obviously stop it from tilting by pressing X, Y, and Z on the keyboard to lock it to certain axes and what have you. But you can change the shapes of things. So you've got a lot more options about what you're going to do. And similar thing with a face. So if we came down here, select a face, let's select this one, pull it up. You can see the whole face moves up and down, almost like the platform of a lift in this case. Okay, so we can play around. So it gives us more options for distorting the shape of the box. So I'm just going to undo all this by Control and Z and get back to my box, which is subdivided. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to select all, deselect all, then select all, just to select the box again. I'm still in edit mode, and I'm going to hit subdivide again. And that gives me more options, and subdivide it again. And subdivide it again. And I can keep subdividing this, and coming into selection mode, so select, deselect, and then each one of these becomes a selectable node. So you can start building up all sorts of interesting shapes. Just by clicking on them with the right mouse button and pulling. Okay. So you can start changing the way objects look. Now, the trouble with this, as we'll look at in the next video, is each one of these squares is a polygon, and each one of these squares is taking up processing power. And the more squares you have, the more your graphics card needs to be able to cope with it. So you sometimes need to get a bit smart, and you might find that you're not going to use all of these. You might only use a small number of these. So we'll look on the next video at using edge loops as an alternative to this method, even though this method is still valid and is still a useful method. So don't discount this. We're just going to look at an alternative.